We are now in Aliens versus Predator, issue 3. Tension is just getting more and more intense. The colony of Prosperity Wells has now been overrun by the Xenomorph horde, thanks to the Wrenth getting infected. But before we dive into this awesome issue, you guys want to read up, check it out, pause it, read it at your convenience. This is Randy Stradley doing the writing, Phill Norwood doing the pencil and the cover, Carl Story doing the ink, Pat Brosseau letters, Monica Livingston doing the colors. The print date on this was October 1990. And we've talked about this with the first 2 issue, guys, but I miss the human element of drawing comics like this. Yes, I still appreciate that all modern comics, for the most part, are still done by hand, mostly on Wacom tablets. But at least there's still sketching involved. But I mean, on top of that, traditional, using the ink dabbers or whatever they're called, as well as traditional coloring. And you can see here, I mean, just look at the gradation for the background here. There's just something special about having that human element to it, and something that I severely. Now, with that aside, I know that I talk about that, and if you guys want to tell me, shut up, just let me know down in the comments. Anyway, as for this awesome story, last issue, what's her name? Of course, I get in front of the camera, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Machiko. She goes to check on the Lecter, find out why the Wrenth hadn't been taken up to the cargo ship yet. And when they open the hangar, alien horde comes to get her. She comes up this thing called the shield wall or something like that, and she thinks that her number is punched. And then we see this Predator coming in. She says, "We've done our best with limited personnel and resources to fortify Prosperity Wells against the invaders. We could have saved ourselves the trouble. We weren't the target of the invasion. We were merely bystanders caught between 2 opposing forces. Hulking, humanoid warriors like our patient in the med center and the silent, eyeless monsters that haunted my dream." Now, real quick, little antidote as we go here. I highly recommend that you guys read the novelization of this comic. It's called Alien vs. Predator Prey by Stephen Perry and Stephanie Perry. And I've told this story several times here on the channel about growing up in a small town. No comic shops, or if they did come up, they would last maybe top 6 months to a year. And so I never really got to pick up these books. I never got a chance to really sit down and read it. And when you go into Wizard, from what memory serves, I never saw anything about AVP. I mean, I'd see Predator comics in there every once in a while, but during that time period, this is like 93-ish, 94, because Wizard Magazine will go into like grocery stores, gas stations, etc., so forth, as the direct market took over on the comic side. So even though I couldn't get comics regularly, I would devour Wizard to just kind of keep up. And I was going somewhere. Oh, anyway. My dad had an upholstery shop down in kind of the sketchy part of town. And when you go out to the back door, it was like a parking lot, like most strip malls are. But across the way, it was like a coffee/bookstore. And so I would stay with him during the summers. I would go over there, and he'd give me a couple bucks to buy some books, drinks, whatever. I'm like maybe 8, 9 at this point. And so I found, I was introduced to aliens at a very young age. And so when I saw Alien versus Predator, I'd seen Predator 2, and I was like, holy crap, what's this? I got to read it. And that's how I was first introduced to Alien versus Predator, was the novelization. I knew that we would get there, guys. Now, with the antidote over, I bring all that up to say this. As they'd say in Clue, to make a long story short, too late. When she's talking about the eyeless ones, where she goes into the silent, eyeless monsters that haunted my dreams. In the novelization, you find out that Machiko is very standoffish. Like, she starts out in the book standoffish, and we just kind of see her as a corporate bitch, essentially. But in the book, you get into her mind. Think of the books like a compendium, and you find out that her father was embezzling from a company when she was a little girl, and she found him. He committed suicide because he was getting found out, and so that kind of became a continuous thing. And she started building monsters in her head, and so the aliens really hearken to what she's seeing and why she starts out so rough around the edges here on Ryoshi. Now, with that said, you find out too why some of the things that we get into this issue, you're thinking, damn, that's really cold to say, but it really helps move the plot and gives you more depth to Machiko Noguchi. Perhaps it was the connection to my nightmare, as well as the fact that the monsters had killed Mason, that predisposed me against them. On the other hand, the warrior had saved my life, and it was more human than his adversaries. And so she's kind of watching, because maybe it was just his resemblance to my mental picture of the samurai and warrior monks who peopled the stories from my childhood. Or it could have been that it was simply human nature to cheer for the underdog. Whatever the reason, I caught my breath as the warrior leaped heroically, it seemed, to battle. So she's saying that, he's powerful, assured, deadly. And so we're seeing this predator rip through. And that's another thing about the book, the novelization too, is all these predators. I can't remember this guy's name, but all the predators have names. And that's kind of how you find out Broken Tusk. I mean, you find it later on in the comic series, but it's just kind of passing. And it really builds the relationship between Broken Tusk and Machiko. And so anyway, she's saying that, he's deadly, he's powerful, he's assured, and ultimately futile as we see the horde overtake this unblooded predator. She goes, there's a big difference between heroism and stupidity. And in the end, the warrior gained nothing but a glorious and pointless death. Now, as I was talking about, when you kind of get a deeper understanding of Machiko in the novelization, she says here as she's running away as the predator is being ripped apart by the aliens, I didn't look back. I'd learned long time ago, never align yourself with the loser. Whoo! That is some heavy stuff. And then what I liked about the novelization as well. I know you guys are probably like, shut up with the novelization. But I want to talk about how I want to share with you guys how rich this story is. And I mean, don't get me wrong, in terms of comic book, they only have an X amount of time to get this published and whatnot, and less is more. But I think maybe just because it's a connection to my childhood is why the book means so much to me. When Tom and Scott, yeah, that's their names, when they finally get themselves hitched from the hive, which we all know what's going to happen. Because if you think about it, I think even Fede Alvarez said that it's hard to recreate the 1979 aliens surprise that happened to Kane, to John Hurt. So for me, I've read several alien comics. I've read a lot of the alien novels, and of course, I've seen the newer movies, which we're not going to talk about, Prometheus or Covenant or Alien 3 for that matter. For me, the chest burster starts, in my mind, always starts to become like a ticking time bomb. And not like in a cliche. Can't remember the guy's name from the show, but the 24, where you have the countdown, da 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 da. But you're just like, what's gonna happen? So, we know, but they don't know, and that's part of horror is seeing that point of view. Going back to the novel, as Tom and Scott escape, you see them quiet, almost got it. Jesus, where'd they all go? I don't know. One minute they're all around us, the next they've swarmed out of here like mad bees. Anyway, who cares? Let's get out of here. This way, through the emergency hatch. What about that one? Her? She's asleep, I think. Let's go before she wakes up. Now, in terms of visual storytelling, because again, comics, there's more visual storytelling. You see the Queen having that kind of that smile about it. In the book, because books are more obviously, they have to paint a picture with words. They talk about the Queen quietly, stalks their escape. And I can't remember which one that says it, but it says it looks like she's smiling in a So both ways, not saying anything but showing this, but then also from the novel, just great ways to just go, ugh, because you know what's going to happen, and just here it's great. Now, unfortunately, Hiroki, you really come to enjoy this guy, and unfortunately, you find out how heroic he is, and you start to see how all the sternness that was Machiko in the beginning starts to melt away as she starts to say that she starts to see Hiroki had a friend, or was a friend, becoming a friend to her. And so this scene is really heartbreaking. I don't want to go too much over it because I don't want you guys to, I don't want to spoil the entire book. But I love how Hiroki is essentially sealed off the rest of the colony. And we get these images of the security feed, the scratching and whatnot. Stay safe, Machiko. And again, just using visual storytelling to paint this tragic picture. And then you finally see kind of like in a 3-part. Essentially, when you do a film, book, comic, whatever, it's broken up into 3 parts, like the 3-play structure, going all the way back to Shakespeare and beyond, where they'll kind of have the first act, which you kind of get to know everybody, building the world. Second act, the plot point, that the beat that moves everything into motion. And then right in between the second act and the third act, if I remember from film school, there's like the crisis. All hope is lost. And that's kind of what, in my mind, I see here, where Machiko is mourning. And she even says, I'd squandered the time they bought us. I'd failed the colony. I'd failed Hiroki. However, they say, Ms. Noguchi, I want you to see what's on the screens right now. And so again, we get this harrowing view of the outside, and we see these predators dancing around dead colonists, dead xenomorphs, seeing that they're partying. And in the novel, again, having to paint a picture with words, there's someone that she cares about who she sees their head on a pike, which then gets away from that. All hope's lost and launches into the latter half of the third act. This is where everyone's kind of thinking that Machiko is kind of cowering. And she has 10 clips. She's not thinking about going up there. You guessed it. And we kind of see her go from vulnerable to full-on battle bitch. Who owns the fastest hover bike? Roth goes, I guess I do. Where's it parked? That's it, you're taking off. What about the rest of us? I thought you were supposed to be in charge. Where's your sense of responsibility? And of course, what's his name? Ackland. I was like, what's his name? He is the one that started this whole thing, because the Wrenth got infected, which was what kind of pushed into the second act of the story. And he told Roth to lie about where they were found, which killed Dr. Revna's husband. So you start to see all these threads start to come together. And Ackland is just giving her the business, because he just sees her as a corporate goon, unlike Hiroki, who's been there, lived there. And in the book, like, I don't think they say it in the book. I think he does it passing, but in the novel, he looks at her, tells her she needs to get out from behind the corporate desk and get some Wrenth shit between her toes, which is kind of what starts the hero's journey for Machiko. Anyway, I say all that again. Make a long story short, too late. We finally get that catharsis moment. She just smack and punches the living daylights out of Ackland. Responsibility. This whole mess is your fault, Ackland. If we live through this, you're going to find out what happens to people who are responsible. Weaver's in charge until I get back. You'll follow her orders to the letter. Do I make myself clear? And she just goes full ballistic on this bike, just ripping through the xenomorphs. And she's just saying, it's strange. The strange thing was how calm I was. I always believed revenge to be a hot-blooded action, and in the heat of passion, something that would overwhelm a person and cloud her judgment. But I was in complete control. I knew exactly. What I like is how we kind of get this panel of the Predator's helmet. Dr. Revna, forgot all about her. Dr. Revna, it's me, Machiko. And so I like how these two panels correlate because it's an important beat later. And she's trying to tell that she needs to evacuate, what do you call it, her office to come back to the main complex with the rest of the colony. She goes, I can't leave my patient, the Hippocratic doctor's oath. So she says, fine, here's a gun. Don't move. Now remember those two little panels that we saw a moment ago. I don't want to get too far into that. But it finally puts Broken Tusk in the path of his student. That was the one that kind of was causing beef leading up to this expedition. And it, of course, expounds more in the novel. We don't get a whole lot of history between these two predators. But with that said, this being a visual medium, I like how we see that Broken Tusk is the more, what do you call it, seasoned vet. As where this one's the young buck who thinks his poop doesn't stink. Or what how'd they say it on the Venture Brothers? You all think that you're hot shit on a silver platter, but you're really cold diarrhea in a Dixie cup. And that's what his student is. And then he sees skulls, human skulls. And in the novel, it says that Broken Tusk thinks they've been hunting humans. That's forbidden from the unblooded. So this battle's a lot more intense. And I don't want to get, again, further into it. But as they're trying to, as Machiko finally tells Revna, we need to get back to the colony, Dr. Revna sees her patient hanging from this satellite. And she goes, we need to save him. She's like, are you kidding? He's one of them. And she goes, yes, but remember, back at the complex or at the lab, he saved us from the other one. They saw everything in their path as an obstacle to be crushed. I could hear the thunder of hooves and the bellowing of the Rynth clearly above the pounding of the copter's blades. And she releases the Rynth to basically stampede the aliens, which is a really good idea. But anyway, as we come to the end, because we must save him, please, Machiko. As she says, as you go through life, you make rules for yourself, like not aligning yourself with losers. And sometimes So I don't want to spoil. I know we went sort of relatively quick through the book, but I like how the beginning echoes the end of this issue with how she runs from that predator, but has a change of heart. So guys, this is a pivotal part of the Aliens versus Predator crossover, and why this is so important to our modern mythos and pop culture. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen, please first and foremost support your local comic shop or wherever there's going to get your action figures and comics, and pick up this series either in the individual floppies or the collected trade. If you've enjoyed this review, really would appreciate taking a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Helps the channel more than you could possibly know. And if you don't mind hitting that fancy little Yalcha bell next subscribe, that way as I get to upload content, you guys get notified. Come to the channel. I love talking with you on hearing your thoughts and feedback down in the comments or the socials, which I'll make sure the links down in the description. So with all that said, hope you all continue to have an absolutely amazing reading and happy hunting, everyone.